The Atari video computer system is legendary for its role in popularizing the home video game market, as well as contributing to its demise in 1983. But despite having the word as part of its name, we typically don't consider an Atari VCS like this one to be an actual computer. In this episode, we're going to take a look at some of the ways that a few companies, including Atari, tried to turn this iconic game console into a full-fledged computer. Hello and welcome to Operation 8-Bit. I'm your host Tony Landy, and lurking behind the camera, we have Sparky making his normal sarcastic comments. For those of you that are new to our channel, keep an eye out for those. They pop up from time to time during the video, and they look something like this. Also, make sure to stick around to the end of the video and catch some of the bloopers and outtakes from this episode. Alright, let's get into today's topic. The early 1980s was a heyday for the home computer market. Companies like Radio Shack, Texas Instruments, Commodore, Apple, and Atari were releasing systems with expanded memory, better graphics, better sound capabilities, and they could do more than just play games. They were producing full-fledged computers that could run productivity software and that you could write your own programs on. Now, to be fair, you could technically sort of write programs on the Atari with this game called Atari Basic. But that's off topic, and it's a video we're working on for later, so make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when that episode comes out. Back to the point. Real computers, like some of these in the case behind me, were relatively expensive when they first came out. For an example, an entry-level Atari 400, which was released in 1979, had a retail price of around $550. Adjusting for inflation, that's over $2,000 today. Let me put this in a different context. The median rent for an apartment in the US at the time was about $220 a month. So that entry-level home computer was more than 2 months' rent. Now, there were cheaper alternatives available, and competition was beginning to drive prices down. But even with all those options, not all parents were willing or even able to purchase both a video game system and a computer for their kids. By 1983, Atari had sold an estimated 12 million 2600s, and there were at least 4 companies trying to capitalize on that market and the growing demand for home computers by offering an add-on to turn that console into a real computer. The July 1983 issue of Electronic Fun magazine teased us with these offerings by giving us a look at each one of them. The NTex 2000 Piggyback, the Atari Graduate, the SpectraVideo Compumate, and the Unitronix Expander. The idea was that you could plug one of these into your 2600 and they would extend the capability of the console by adding a keyboard, some extra memory, and the ability to add peripherals, like printers and storage devices. Not only that, these companies claimed that they would have a price point between $80 and $200, which would have made them a cost-effective alternative to a new system. Let's take a look at each of these, starting with the Expander. The Unitronix Expander 2 was introduced at the 1983 Winter Consumer Electronics Show. It was supposed to be a combination cassette drive that plugged into a cartridge port with a keyboard attachment. Our research didn't turn up a lot of information about this thing, but we were able to find a few magazine articles that make references to it and gave us some details. One source was the August-September 1983 issue of Video Games Player magazine. Based on this article, and a few others we read, for around $150, the Expander would add an extra 8K of ROM, 16K of RAM, and add support for a printer, modem, and even a speech synthesizer. The cartridge slot on the top allowed you to use standard Atari VCS cartridges, Or you could even pop in an optional 16K memory expansion that would bring it all the way up to 32K of RAM. Pretty impressive for the time. I would be even more impressed if it actually made it to store shelves. Another announced add-on that never made it to market was the NTex 2000 piggyback color computer. It was slated for release in May of '83 with a price tag of around $200. This one was supposed to come with a Zilog Z80A processor, 8K of ROM, and 3K of RAM. 2K of that was user accessible, and the other 1K was for video. This is the only Atari VCS add-on that offered a full-stroke keyboard, which, according to reviewers, actually had a pretty good feel to it. On the downside, those same reviews stated that the graphics were pretty bad and that the built-in version of BASIC was limited. Another shortcoming was the lack of a tape drive interface for loading and saving programs. NTex did have plans to produce an expansion module to address some of those shortcomings, but the whole project was scrapped and, to our knowledge, no units were ever actually shipped to consumers. One of the best-known entries in this category has to be the Atari Graduate. Back in 1982, 3 Commodore engineers that had worked on the VIC-20 and C64 were looking at that 12 million user base and started to think about a keyboard add-on for the Atari that they dubbed My First Computer. The system was announced on February 9th, 1983, with a target release of Q3 that same year, and a planned price tag of $79. It featured a membrane keyboard like the Atari 400, 8K of RAM, built-in BASIC, and a full-color display. There were also a slew of peripherals like a modem, a printer, and a wafer drive that they had planned for it. Tons of marketing materials and press releases were produced, and Atari even teased that it would be available in their 1983 I Want Everything TV commercial.
I'd like an Atari 2600 system, please, and everything that goes with it.
Everything? You sure you want everything?
I want everything.
Now you get a new low price, up to $30 in rebate offers, and a free pack.
Is that everything?
It's not everything. You can get nearly 300 different cartridges.
300?
That's nothing.
It's something.
But it's not everything. Soon there'll be a voice module, trackball, remote control joysticks, and a computer keyboard.
It's amazing.
It's amazing, but it's not everything.
It's not everything.
Soon there'll be educational games, too.
Is that everything?
That's everything, for now.
For now?
Originally, the Graduate was only supposed to be a keyboard add-on. But Atari started putting a lot of demands on PVI regarding system specifications, case design, and a lot of other enhancements. PVI tried to push back, insisting that the changes would move the unit into a $350 price range, where it would actually start competing against the VIC-20 and the Atari 400. Then, in September of 1983, James Morgan took over at Atari and canceled the project outright. So, like the other systems we looked at, the Graduate was never released. There is only one working prototype of the Graduate that is known to exist, and it was first shown at the World of Atari show in 1998. This same unit was apparently on display at the National Video Game Museum here in Frisco, Texas for a time. I did reach out and contact the museum to see if it was still there, but they said it was only on loan and it's now back in the possession of the original owner. That kind of sucks because I would really like to see it up close and get some fresh footage and fresh images of it for this video. Oh well. The last entry in this category is the SpectraVideo Compumate. But unlike the other add-ons that I've talked about so far, this one was actually released. And I have one. The Compumate was released in January 6, 1983 at the Winter CES in Las Vegas, and it originally sold for about $79. It was also released in Germany as the Universum Heimcomputer, and there were also 2 clones that were produced in Brazil, the Milmar Electronics Dr. Comp and the Sosocal CompuGame. Now, we could not find much information on the clones, but what we do know is that SpectraVideo produced both an NTSC and a PAL version of this system. Now, for a long time, these were pretty rare, but they've become easier to find after a large number of them surfaced in Venezuela back in 2010, which is where I got this one from. If you decide to get one thing you need to know is that unless it's specifically stated in the description, it's not really that easy to tell which region you're getting just by looking at the box or the serial number. What I have been able to piece together is that there is actually a clue on the quality control sticker. If you look closely, and you probably can't see it, this one says quality control past N. From what I've read in a few forums, this is the NTSC version, and the PAL version has the letter P, so it'll say QC past P. Now, I'm not sure if that's a 100% accurate way to know which is which, but it's been the best I've had to go on so far. Okay, let's get this thing out of the box and get a better look at it. The front of the box is pretty straightforward. It shows the keyboard and proclaims that you can write programs, play music, and create drawings with something called Magic Easel. From this view, you can also get a better look at the quality control sticker with the letter N. On the back of the box, we can see a bold claim how this is going to turn your Atari VCS into a powerful personal computer. Well, we'll see about that. Here in the basic programming section, it lays out some system specs, and it calls out that you can connect it to a tape recorder to load additional games. Now, there were only 2 games ever released for the system. One was a drawing program called PictureMate, and the other was this music program called SongMate. I got this one from the same seller that I bought my Compumate from. This one is still in the original packaging, and given that this is pretty rare, I'm gonna leave it that way. Anyway, back to the box. Over here we see some pictures showing how easy it is supposed to be to connect to your Atari. And we have a nice picture that shows the keyboard fitting on top of the console. One little weird thing I noticed is over here in the graphic capability description. If you look at the second bullet, they use the British spelling of the word color. But on the front side, they use the American spelling without the U. Alright, why don't we get this thing out of the box? As you can see, the unit is in really good shape and still has the original plastic bag and the silica pack. I also have the original user's manual and warranty registration card that's never been filled out. And I don't think at this point, if I do fill it out and send it in, that they'll honor anything. The manual also covers things like how to connect the system, how to play some of the built-in programs, and it also gives an introduction on how to write programs using Compumate Basic. The keyboard is a 42-key membrane style similar to what the Graduate was going to have. Each key has multiple functions and codes, and there are some shortcuts for basic programming commands similar to what we would find on the Sinclair ZX80 series. On the side, we have the audio ports for connecting a tape deck. And here in the box, we also have the cable that you would need for that. On the back of the unit, the cartridge is tucked away for storage when not in use. I guess this was intended to make it easier to keep things in order. So the cartridge plugs into your Atari just like any other game. And it has this cable that runs back to the keyboard, and then these two that plug into the joystick ports of the console. Inside the cartridge, we have a chip that adds an extra 2K of RAM, and we also have these two 8K ROM chips stacked on top of each other that are soldered together pin for pin. This is definitely an interesting layout, and I don't remember seeing anything like it before. My guess is that they did this to save space and reduce manufacturing costs. Just like we saw in the box, the keyboard fits nicely on top of the Atari. But the cable is also long enough to have it separated, which seems that it would be a lot more comfortable to type on that way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug this into my Retron 77 and boot it up. The Retron has an HDMI port, so this will make it a lot easier to run through my screen capture devices, and we can get a better look at some of the features. So when this boots up, we're greeted with a pretty generic screen with the Compumate logo and a OK prompt. After a few seconds, it'll start to play a little tinny sounding rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Why don't we start out and let's try a simple Hello World program. I've never been a fan of membrane keyboards, and this one is no exception. My typing style is similar to Scotty's hunt and peck method, so pressure pads don't really work all that well for me. As I said before, the keyboard sort of reminds me of the Sinclair, where it has the shortcut keys for common basic programming commands like print, go to, or next. It does take a little getting used to, and I do catch myself trying to type out the statements in full. Okay, well, that looks like crap. The screen resolution of 12 by 9 on this thing is pretty lame. But my guess is that this may be a limit because it's piggybacking off the Atari hardware for video out. The manual doesn't really go into much detail about Compumate Basic, and some of the functions like int and step aren't even mentioned at all. Luckily, I was able to find some sample programs that were created and published in 1998 by a guy named Graham.J.Percy. This is a simple text adventure game that Graham wrote, and it gives us a better demonstration of the language capabilities as well as the system limitations. This program is just under 100 lines of code, but it takes up every last bit of memory. Literally, if you add one more line of code to this, you get an out of memory error. That's it. That's the entire program. Kill the ogre, get the armor, get the key, kill the troll, you win, yay. Given the limitations of the system, this is actually pretty cool, and Graham did a good job of adding some randomization in there and making it a fun little program for what it is. So thank you, Graham, for writing this. It was kind of fun. Other than that, the best thing I can say for this is that typing in the program did help me become more familiar with the keyboard. On the other hand, it also further emphasized the limits of what the Compumate is capable of. So, what's my verdict? Well, as a full-fledged computer, the Compumate does fall short in some areas compared to the other 8-bit machines that were coming out at the time. The things I pointed out earlier, like the screen resolution, the really hobbled version of BASIC, and the lack of third-party software are definite drawbacks. But despite the obvious limitations, if we consider the platform that it's running on, and the market it was trying to target, actually the Compumate really isn't all that bad. I could see that if I was a kid and I already had an Atari and I wanted a computer, this would have been a pretty cool way to get both at a relatively reasonable price. There are other features like the music maker or the graphics program that I didn't get into in this video, but this episode was already running long, so I decided to skip reviewing those. Besides, I'm really not all that musically inclined. That's the 8-bit guy's thing. Maybe I'll reach out to him to see if he wants to do something on that feature. At the end of the day, the Compumate is definitely an interesting part of computer history, and I'm really happy to have this thing as part of my collection. I am curious if anyone out there actually had one of these back in the 80s, and if you did, please leave a comment below and let me know how old you were when you got it and what you thought of it back then. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe because we do have more videos on the way. And yes, I did just reset this thing to annoy you. As a reminder, all of the profits and any ad revenue that we make from this YouTube channel go to support charitable organizations like the Tour de Force 9/11 Memorial Bike Ride, who in turn use those funds to support the families of law enforcement officers who lose their lives in the line of duty. For a complete list of the charities that we support and how you can help, please visit our website. I've left the link to that in the description below. Again, we really hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on Operation 8-Bit. But that's off topic, and it's a video we're working on for later. So make sure to... I lost my entire fucking... Where'd the teleprompter go? Oh god. They pop up from Tom? Tom's not in this episode. Where the hell is Blinder? You know, I really like the new chair. I finally got my new chair. Still need a bigger workbench. Anyway, I think we're done with this video.
Okay.